Thought about you guys yesterday. I got a new roof on our house and nasty weather, cold, kind of wet, and I was thinking, man, it's hard to work when it's this kind of weather. And so prayed for you guys even just on the ride over this morning. Yeah, in our devotional this morning, we're going to talk about God's glory. God's glory, it's one of those themes you're going to see on every page of the Bible. It's everywhere. We could talk about it at length for a long time. But we're going to look at it today from a few different passages, specifically even seeing God's glory in his creation and then how we respond in light of that glory. So even just to get an idea of how big, how great, how glorious God is, there's a lot of things that could serve as our teacher in the Bible. We can look at the person and work of Jesus. We can look at the whole storyline of the Bible and see how it shows us the glory of the God who's over everything. And then we can also just look at nature. In other words, the world around us. And so that's what we're doing now. So nature gives us numerous profound examples of how glorious God is. Sometimes in my life, when things get stressful, when I find my mind is just preoccupied, it even helps me to slow down, to walk around, to look at the world that God created. Even just looking up at the sky will put my problems into perspective, even my whole existence into perspective. And that's what the biblical writers even do. So often we see them pointing to the world around them, pointing to the world that God created as a way to help them remember and even to help others see how profound, how majestic, how glorious God is. If a God's powerful enough, creative enough to create everything, surely he must be trustworthy. Surely he must be in control of all things. Um, so if you ever studied the book of Job, you'll know that Job was a man who had it all and lost it all. He lost wealth, health, his family, and then he starts to question God, like, why would you do these things to me? And so God tells him in Job 38, verses 4 and 5, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know, or who stretched the line upon it? So there's the big gap between what Job thinks that he knows, right? There's only so far that that'll go, and the gap is between what Job knows and what God knows. So Job is put in his place, seeing there's this gap between God's infinite glory and the lack of power and knowledge he has as a mere mortal man. And God tells him, I've laid the earth's foundations. I know its measurements. I don't know if you knew this. I was interested to find out that even with all the scientific accomplishments, advancements that we have today, even today, not even the most advanced scientists know the exact measurements of the Earth. They estimate that the Earth might weigh around 6 million tons. It's a lot of zeros behind the six. And long before the internet, way back in the 5th or 6th century BC, God tells Job, I know the exact measurements of the Earth. And though the Earth is unimaginably big, right? We can't even measure it. Its size is only a fraction of the size of planets like Jupiter and Saturn. And then we read in the creation narrative, God created those in a single day, just a few days after he creates the earth. And Job isn't the only passage where God says, look above to see what I've created and know something about me. We also see in Isaiah 40:25 and 26, God says, to whom then will you compare me? Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these. So he's referring to the stars. He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might. And because he is strong in power, not one of them is missing. So again, God says, look up at the sky above you. Look at the stars that come out. Remember, they didn't just show up there unexpectedly. They didn't just poof and now they're there in the sky, right? I had to create every single one of them, and I've sustained them for thousands and thousands of years. The fact that none of them falls or just spins out of control is testament to even God's power and his majesty. So God's saying, as you study the stars, you'll learn something about me, about my power, about my might, about the ability that I have to create and sustain life. And I think when we look at the stars, we're even reminded how frail, how weak, how marching toward death we are every second, unlike these stars that have been there for long, long thousands of years. Now, the star we know the best, the one we rely on the most, we forget it's a star, is the sun. And God made the sun so massive you could fill the sun 1,000 times with the planet Jupiter. And we know the Earth is massive, and yet the sun is approximately 1.3 million times the size of the Earth. God created a sun that's big enough to lose 6 million tons of mass every second. Can you even just imagine that it's shrinking every second and yet it remains as big as it is? There's no dent in the sun. So it's humbling to think about that, right? I often think about how big my problems are, treating my circumstances as though the earth is revolving around me. And in reality, there's a world of over 8 billion people. We're all just individual small specks in this massive world that's God's created. Isaiah, of course, he didn't know the exact science behind the galaxies above. And yet he had the God-given wisdom to recognize the one who set the sun and stars into motion is far, far greater than him, far greater than all created things. In the Gospel of John, chapter 12, we read Isaiah said these things because he saw God's glory. And I promise I only have a few more of these nerdy scientific facts here, but the biggest star scientists know of is called VY Canis Majoris, if I even said that right. Oh, I'm getting a nod here, and BJ, I think, is a NASA aficionado. Okay. Well, yeah, that star, the biggest star that we know of, is over 3 billion times the size of the sun that we just talked about, how big the sun is. And it's hundreds and hundreds of light years away from you and I. And so when we read in Genesis 1:16 that God made the stars, that small phrase, it's easy to just yawn and, okay, moving on. But our jaws should drop that there's this being so powerful that he could do all this so methodically, so effortlessly. He's bigger than that biggest star. And you might think, how on earth would a being like that, who could create such things as these, take any interest in me, take any delight in small, insignificant me? Maybe you say, I appreciate that someone can believe there's a being out there who created all this stuff, but why would that have bearing on my life? Why would he care anything about me? Maybe he's like the watchmaker who sets all these things in motion and then he just walks away, letting it do whatever it's going to do. But Scripture doesn't tell us that God's like that. He didn't just carefully create and sustain the stars, the planets, the galaxies. The Bible repeatedly shows that he cares and concerns much, much more for human beings. He creates man and woman in his own image. We're his image bearers. So David in Psalm 83, he holds up both of these things together, God creating the galaxies and God creating mankind, when he says, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set into place, what is man that you are mindful of him? And the Son of Man that you care for him? David also couldn't have known the science behind God creating 2 trillion galaxies. He couldn't know there's literally more stars in each of those 2 trillion galaxies than there are grains of sand on all the beaches in the world. And yet, even today, David's words haven't lost any significance. In fact, the more we learn about science, the more we should be gripped with wonder that the God had created all these things, every grain of sand, every star in the sky. He's still mindful of you and I. So even when it's a little warmer and you're able to walk out on the beach, just think about how boundless and creative and majestic God is to create more stars in the sky, even than the grains of sand. And though our lives are tiny and minuscule, we live and die in such a smaller gap of time than these things. God cares more deeply for us, right? Our lives on this earth might be a vapor, and yet God has purpose in how he creates us, and he has an eternal purpose and significance for our lives. And that's why we see the creation narrative even slowing down when God bends and stoops to create life, breathing the breath of life into man as he intimately creates us in his image. And so we don't have to be like pantheists who worship the creation. Whenever we see the creation, we can worship someone who's far, far greater, someone who's able to make all these things. His handiwork should inspire us to bow before him and him alone. And as I was preparing this talk, I was thinking about my relationship with the Lord, how often over the years I've forgotten the power and the might of the one that I worship. It's easy to think of God as this safe, comfortable God and forgetting, yes, he's that, but he's also big and glorious. For all the times I've ignored the sand below my feet, ignoring the stars over my head, and taking it for granted, even that God would stoop to create me, I forget how amazing it is that after forming me and allowing me to come into the world, he'd go out of his way to continue to care about my life, what I'm feeling, that he'd listen when I speak to him, that he'd sympathize with me in moments of weakness. And the God who creates heaven and earth, he moves it all in sending his son, right? We learn that Jesus existed even before the world was created, and yet he was sent to earth, taking on flesh as a human man that would live and die and be raised to redeem a people for himself. And so the God who creates every part of nature so perfectly, so powerfully, so creatively, he gives us no greater reminder than giving his own son, the firstborn of all creation. Hebrews 1:3 says, Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God. He's the exact imprint of his nature, and through him he upholds the universe by the word of his power. And so Jesus' power, his purity, it also like the sand, like the stars, it shows us how small, how sinful we can be. And yet it also shows us that the God who's powerful enough to create all these things, he also wants to draw near to us and know us. Um, so yeah, Paul Tripp, he's a pastor and a writer. He often talks about how foolish it is to be like a glory hog, right? A glory hog is someone who walks into the room and they want all the glory to themselves. They want to show off how good they are. But instead of being like glory hogs, we can be glory ambassadors, Paul Tripp says. We can show off the massive magnitude of God. And ambassador is someone who's delivering someone else's mail, right? They're not showing up with their message. They're showing up delivering the message of the King to other people. And that's what we can do. We can be used by God to show off his glory, his magnitude, his worth, just like the stars do, just like the galaxies above us do. And God, throughout the Bible, throughout church history, he's loved taking insignificant, small people, using him for greater, significant purposes, right? In his story, his mission, the creator of the entire world would use us to spread his glory across the entire earth. And so if we want our lives to count, if we want them to be spent on something greater than us, before we pour ourselves out to benefit the people around us, we have to be filled. And one of the things I think that even fills us most is these reminders of God and his vast purposes, even for his creation. So don't stop looking up, looking around you at what God's created. Know that the God who created all these things, he's worthy of worship. He's worthy of knowing, and he wants to know each of us. So let me pray. God, help us live in each day in all of you, Lord. It's so easy um, to drive across the bridge and forget that you created the seas, you created the fish of the deep, and yeah, how vast and how beautiful, how glorious this world is, and yet we know you're even bigger, you're even more beautiful and more glorious than these things. And so I pray that we would have a growing desire to be used for your purposes. I pray that we would see you as great, we would see you as magnificent and powerful, and yet even remember that you delight in being in relationship with us. We ask these things in the name of Christ. Amen.
Well, thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
Awesome message. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's kind of easy, right, to get take for granted
Mm.
all of God's mastery, his creation. Just, I mean, just get caught up in the little day-to-day details of life, and we
Yeah.
forget about his glory and everything he's done. So
That's right.
thanks for that. That was an awesome message. So,
Thanks, bud.
couple announcements I did miss. So I apologize, but James Sampson, started yesterday as a pipe player, and Christian Happ, loader operator. He started yesterday. Okay, he started yesterday as well. So if you would welcome them aboard. And then there's a special birthday who got online here. I think he's on here. Yeah, looks like it. Dr. Scott Hollenbeck. So happy birthday, Scott. Appreciate you joining us each week. And yeah, I hope you have a great day, a great birthday. So anybody have anything they want to add or any questions? All right, well, if not, then I hope everybody has a great weekend and God bless.